Hello, everyone. Tonight we journey with you across the frozen tundra, where the sky meets ice in an endless embrace. Before we begin the story of quiet endurance and ancient wisdom, if you enjoy narratives that help you relax and drift into peaceful rest, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, only if these stories truly bring you comfort. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let this tale carry you gently forward into the cold. As soon as the blue mist appeared on the cold horizon, the peasants changed course in the tundra, their sledges groaning as they turned away from the familiar path their ancestors had traveled for generations. The mist had come without warning. One moment, the horizon showed only white and pale gray, the colors of a world locked in winter. The next, a ribbon of blue stretched across the distant edge of the tundra, neither sky nor ice, but something between. It glowed faintly, pulsing like breath. Peter was the first to see it. He stopped his sledge and raised his hand, signaling the others to halt. Behind him, 17 families pulled their sledges to a stop, breath clouding the air, eyes following his gaze. "The blue mist," someone whispered. Everyone knew the stories. The blue mist appeared perhaps once in a lifetime, sometimes less. When it came, you did not question. You changed direction. The old ones said it was the tundra's way of warning travelers away from danger. Thin ice, hidden crevasses, weather that could kill in hours. Peter's wife Anna stood beside him, their daughter Helen tucked between them for warmth. The girl was 9, small for her age but strong in the way children of the tundra learn to be strong. She looked at the blue glow with wonder rather than fear. "How far must we go around it?" Anna asked quietly. Peter studied the mist. It stretched north to south as far as he could see, perhaps 20 miles across. Going around would add days to their journey, but no one questioned the necessity. "We turn east," he decided. "Follow the ridgeline until the mist is behind us." But what Peter did not say was that turning east meant entering territory none of them knew well. The group consisted of 17 families, 63 people in total. They were peasants from the southern settlements, making their annual migration to the winter fishing grounds. This journey happened every year when the lakes froze solid enough to support ice fishing through the long, dark months. The route they normally took was well established, marked by cairns built over generations. But now those markers would be useless. They would be traveling blind. John, who was 70 and the eldest among them, approached Peter. His granddaughter Marie walked beside him, supporting his arm, though the old man would never admit he needed help. "The east route," John said slowly. "I traveled it once as a boy, with my father. There are dangers." "What kind of dangers?" Peter asked.
John's eyes narrowed as he searched his memory. "Wind. The ridge offers no shelter, and the ground is rougher. Sledges can break. We must move carefully." Peter nodded. He had expected as much. They began the turn, each family maneuvering their sledge with practiced efficiency. These sledges were their lifeline, carrying everything they owned: furs for warmth, dried fish and grain for food, tools for ice fishing, tents made from caribou hide. Children rode on top of the loads when they grew tired. Adults walked alongside, conserving the strength of the dogs that pulled the sledges. Helen walked beside her parents now, her small legs working hard to keep pace. She watched the blue mist as they moved, fascinated by how it seemed to shimmer and shift. "Why is it blue?" she asked her mother. Anna considered the question. The truth was, no one knew. Some say it's ice crystals catching light in a special way. Others believe it's the breath of the land itself. What matters is that we respect it. The afternoon passed in steady travel. The sun, low and pale, traced its brief arc across the southern sky. This far north, winter days were short. They would have perhaps 4 hours of usable light, then twilight, then darkness. As they moved east, the terrain began to change. The flat expanse of the tundra gave way to gentle rises and falls. Not quite hills, but enough variation to make sledge travel harder. Dogs strained against their harnesses. People leaned into the work. Peter watched his family carefully. Anna was strong, but he knew the extra effort would tire her quickly. Helen was keeping up so far, but the child's legs were short. He would need to let her ride soon. Behind them, the blue mist remained visible for hours, a constant reminder of why they had changed course. No one looked at it directly for long. There was an unspoken agreement that the mist deserved respect, not curiosity. As the light began to fail, Peter called for camp. They had practiced this routine countless times. Each family knew their role. The sledges were arranged in a rough circle, creating a windbreak. Tents went up quickly, staked to the frozen ground with iron pegs, driven in with wooden mallets. The sound of metal on wood echoed across the empty land. Fire was precious here. There were no trees, no wood to burn. Instead, they used dried dung, collected during warmer months and carried carefully. Mixed with a small amount of seal oil, it burned slowly and steadily, producing enough heat to cook food and warm hands. The central fire was lit first, tended by the women while men secured the tents and checked the sledges for damage. Children were sent to chip ice from a nearby drift, ice that would be melted for drinking water. Helen worked alongside other children, her small hands gripping the iron chisel, breaking off chunks of clean ice. The work kept her warm, kept her mind occupied.
That night, families gathered briefly around the central fire before retreating to their tents. Peter stood and spoke, his voice carrying in the still air. "We travel unknown ground now. The ridge route will be harder than the southern path. But we've faced difficult journeys before. We move together, we watch for each other, and we will reach the fishing grounds safely." There was quiet assent. These were practical people. They didn't need speeches, only clear direction. As darkness settled fully, the temperature dropped with shocking speed. This was the true test of the tundra. Days could be cold, but nights were brutal. Families retreated to their tents. Inside Peter and Anna's tent, they arranged their sleeping area with care. Furs were layered beneath them, insulation against the frozen ground. More furs were piled on top. Helen was placed in the middle, warmest position, with her parents on either side. But before sleep, there was the evening meal. Anna heated a pot over a small lamp that burned seal oil. Into it went dried fish, a handful of grain, and melted ice. The resulting stew was thin but hot, and heat mattered more than flavor. They ate slowly, letting the warmth spread through their bodies. Helen's eyes grew heavy as she finished her portion. "Sleep now," Anna whispered, pulling furs higher around her daughter. Peter lay awake longer, listening. The wind had picked up, testing the tent walls. But the tent held. It was well made, sewn by Anna's hands with waterproof seams. Outside, he could hear dogs settling into sleep, their breathing slow and steady. Tomorrow they would continue east. How far, he was not certain. Until the blue mist was well behind them, until they could safely turn north again toward the fishing grounds. He thought about John's warning: wind with no shelter, rough ground. These were real dangers, but they had survived worse. The tundra demanded respect, but it also rewarded those who moved with care and patience. Sleep came slowly, in stages. Peter drifted, woke briefly to add oil to the lamp, then drifted again. This was how nights passed in the tundra. Light sleep, constant awareness, ready to respond if danger arrived. Outside, the blue mist continued to glow on the western horizon, unseen but present, a mystery that had changed their path and would shape the journey ahead. Morning came slowly, announced first by a gradual lightening of the eastern sky. Peter woke before the others, his body trained by years of early rising. The tent was cold, despite the lamp that had burned through the night. His breath clouded thick and white. He dressed carefully, adding layers with methodical precision. First the inner wool, then leather, then the outer fur coat that reached his knees. Boots were checked for cracks, gloves were tested for flexibility. Every piece of clothing mattered. Outside, the world was still. No wind, which was a blessing. The sky held that peculiar clarity that came with extreme cold, stars still visible though dawn approached. Other families were beginning to stir, smoke rising from tent vents as morning fires were lit. Peter walked the perimeter of camp, checking on the sledges. Ice had formed on the runners overnight, which was expected. It would need to be scraped off before they could move. The dogs were awake, watching him with patient eyes. They would need to be fed before the day's travel. John approached, moving stiffly. The old man's joints protested the cold more each year. "The mist?" John asked. Peter turned to look west. The blue glow was still there, perhaps slightly dimmer in the growing light, but unmistakably present. "Still there. We continue east." John nodded. He had expected no other answer. The camp came fully alive as families emerged from tents. Children were bundled in layers until they could barely move, sent to gather more ice while adults began the morning routine. Dogs were fed small portions of dried fish. Sledges were inspected and repaired where needed. The morning meal was simple: leftover stew from the night before, reheated. Hot tea made from herbs gathered in warmer months. Everyone ate quickly, efficiently. Warmth from food was temporary but necessary. Helen helped her mother pack their tent, folding the heavy hides with small but capable hands. The child had learned early that everyone contributed. There were no idle hands in a traveling group.
"Will we see the mist again today?" Helen asked. "Perhaps," Anna replied, "but we'll be moving away from it. By tonight it should be behind us." They resumed travel within 2 hours of waking. The ridgeline John had mentioned became more pronounced as they moved east. The ground rose gradually, offering a slightly elevated path through the tundra. But with elevation came exposure. Wind returned, not violent but constant. It found every gap in clothing, every weakness in the sledge's covering. People leaned into it, accepting it as part of the landscape. Peter set a slower pace than usual. The rough ground forced caution. Sledges rocked and swayed over frozen earth that was uneven, pocked with small depressions and ridges. One broken runner would delay the entire group. Marie, John's granddaughter, walked beside her grandfather's sledge. She was 17, strong and capable. She had taken over much of the work her grandfather could no longer manage, doing so without complaint or comment. "Tell me about your journey here as a boy," she said, knowing the story would help pass the time and keep the old man engaged. John smiled faintly. "I was perhaps 12. My father led a smaller group, maybe 8 families. We came this way because of deep snow on the southern route. The ridge was clear, wind-scoured." He paused, breathing heavily. Walking and talking required more effort than it once had. "We made good time, but one night a storm came. Not snow, just wind.
So strong it tore one tent completely away. The family inside survived only because they managed to huddle together under furs until morning." Marie absorbed this story with quiet attention. It was a reminder that the tundra could turn deadly with little warning. By midday, the sun reached its highest point, though it never rose far above the horizon. The light was pale and thin, casting long shadows from the smallest irregularities in the ground. Peter called a brief stop. People needed rest, needed to eat something. The sledges were circled again, creating shelter from the wind. Small fires were lit, just enough to heat water for tea. Helen sat close to the fire, hands extended toward the warmth. Other children did the same, their faces red from cold and wind. But there was no complaining. Complaining changed nothing. Anna noticed that one of the families, Thomas and Margaret with their 3 young sons, were struggling more than the others. Their sledge was heavily loaded, and Thomas was limping slightly. She approached Margaret quietly. "Your husband is injured?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "His ankle. He twisted it this morning. He won't admit it's bothering him." Anna considered this. An injury, even minor, could become serious in these conditions, but there was little they could do except continue. Stopping was not an option. "Keep watch on it. If it swells, if he cannot walk, we'll need to redistribute weight from your sledge." Margaret nodded gratefully. The offer of help meant everything. After the brief rest, they continued. The ridgeline stretched ahead, endless and exposed. The blue mist was no longer visible behind them, lost beyond the curve of the land. But its influence remained. They were committed to this route now. Afternoon brought a change in the sky. Clouds began to gather from the north, high and wispy at first, then gradually thickening. Peter watched them with concern. Clouds meant weather, and weather could mean many things. "We should camp early," John suggested, seeing the same signs, "before whatever's coming arrives." Peter agreed. Better to be secure in camp than caught in the open if conditions worsened. They found a slight depression in the ground, just deep enough to offer minimal shelter. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. Tents went up with increased urgency. Everyone could feel the change approaching. The wind shifted, coming now from the north. The temperature dropped noticeably. People moved faster, securing everything, checking and double-checking tent stakes. Helen helped gather dung for the fire, her small arms carrying what they could. Other children did the same, understanding without being told that speed mattered now. By the time the tents were secure and the central fire lit, the first snow began to fall. Not heavy, just small, hard pellets driven by wind. It stung exposed skin, collected in the folds of clothing. Families retreated to their tents early. There would be no gathering around the fire tonight. Each family would tend to themselves. Inside their tent, Peter and Anna worked to create as much warmth as possible. Extra furs were piled around Helen. The seal oil lamp was positioned carefully, providing heat and light. The evening meal was prepared in silence, both adults listening to the wind outside. "Is this a storm?" Helen asked, her voice small. "Not yet," Peter replied. "Just wind and light snow, but we're prepared if it becomes more." The child seemed satisfied with this answer. She had learned to trust her parents' judgment. They ate their meal slowly, savoring the heat. Afterwards, Anna checked Helen for any signs of frostbite, examining fingers, toes, nose, ears, all clear. The child was well protected. As night deepened, the wind increased. The tent walls rippled and snapped,
but held. The sound was constant, a low roar that made sleep difficult. Peter lay awake, listening not just to the wind but for any sound that might indicate danger. But the camp held. The storm, if it could be called that, was loud but not violent. Snow accumulated outside, drifting against the windward side of tents, but not enough to bury them. Helen slept between her parents, her breathing slow and even. Children had an ability to sleep through conditions that kept adults awake. Perhaps it was trust, or perhaps simply exhaustion. Anna lay awake as well, her thoughts on the other families. Were they managing? Was Thomas's ankle causing him more pain? Were the children all warm enough? There was an intimacy to traveling in a group like this. You knew everyone's struggles, everyone's strengths. You watched out for each other not out of obligation, but because survival depended on it. The night passed slowly. Peter added oil to the lamp twice, keeping the small flame alive. Outside, the wind continued its work, reshaping snow, testing every tent, every stake, every decision they had made. Toward morning, the wind began to ease. Not suddenly, but gradually, the roar diminishing to a steady push, then to occasional gusts. By the time pale light began to show in the east, the storm had passed. Peter emerged from the tent to assess the damage. Snow had drifted against tents and sledges, but nothing was buried beyond recovery. Other men were emerging as well, checking their own camps. There was relief in the morning air. They had weathered the storm without loss. Now they faced a new challenge, digging out and continuing their journey through snow that was deeper than before. But this was familiar work. They had tools for this, experience for this. The morning routine began with the added task of clearing snow, everyone working together without complaint. By mid-morning they were ready to travel again. The ridgeline ahead showed clear, wind having scoured it clean in places while creating deep drifts in others. They would need to navigate carefully, but they would move. Peter led them forward once more.
Behind them, the blue mist was days behind, almost forgotten in the immediacy of daily survival. Ahead lay more tundra, more cold, more challenges. The second day of travel along the ridgeline revealed the true nature of this route. The ground was not just rough, it was treacherous in ways the southern path never was. Hidden beneath snow were rocks, frozen earth thrust up by ancient ice, depressions that could trap a sledge runner. Progress was slow. Peter walked ahead now, probing the ground with a long staff, testing each section before signaling the sledges forward. It was exhausting work, but necessary. One broken sledge could strand an entire family. Thomas struggled more visibly now. His ankle had swollen overnight, despite Margaret's attempts to wrap and support it. He tried to hide his limp, but everyone could see. Pride prevented him from asking for help directly, but the community understood. Two of the younger men, Daniel and James, quietly moved to assist with Thomas's sledge. They took positions on either side, adding their strength to the dog's efforts, lightening Thomas's burden without making it obvious. This was how the group functioned. Help was given before it was asked for. Weakness was supported without shame. Helen rode on the sledge more often now, her small body conserving energy. She watched the landscape pass, noting how different it looked from the familiar southern route. There were formations here, wind-carved shapes in the snow that looked almost alive. "Mother, why does the wind make patterns?" she asked during one of the brief rests. Anna looked at the swirling designs in the snow around them. "The wind is like water. It flows around obstacles, carves the softest parts away, leaves the hardest parts standing. Over time, it shapes everything." Helen considered this. The idea that something as invisible as wind could reshape the solid earth fascinated her. John, overhearing the conversation, added his own observation. The old ones used to read the snow patterns. They could tell which direction storms came from, where wind was strongest, even where animals might shelter. It was a language, learned over lifetimes. Marie listened to her grandfather with attention. She was already learning this language herself, watching how snow drifted, how ice formed, how the land spoke to those who paid attention. By the third day on the ridge route, a new concern emerged.
Their food stores were being depleted faster than planned. The extra effort required to navigate rough ground meant they were eating more, burning more calories, and the detour had added distance to their journey. Peter and Anna discussed this quietly that evening, not wanting to alarm the others. "We have enough for perhaps 8 more days," Anna calculated, "if we maintain current rations." "And the fishing grounds?" Peter asked. "Should be 5 days ahead, if we can turn north soon." "If," Peter repeated. That was the question.
When could they safely turn north? The blue mist had pushed them east, but how far east did they need to go? He decided to consult with John and the other experienced travelers the next morning. That night, as families settled into their tents, there was a different quality to the darkness. The sky was unusually clear, and stars appeared in extraordinary numbers. The cold that produced such clarity was deep and biting. Inside the tents, people huddled closer. Extra furs were distributed to the children first, then the elderly. Everyone else made do with what remained. Helen, lying between her parents, asked a question that had been building in her mind. Will we always have enough food? Peter and Anna exchanged a glance in the dim lamplight. We have enough, Peter said carefully. And when we reach the fishing grounds, there will be plenty. The lakes are full of fish. We will fill our stores for the winter. This was true, but it skirted the real concern. They needed to reach the fishing grounds before their current supplies ran out. Helen seemed satisfied. She trusted her parents completely. Morning of the 4th day brought a decision point. Peter gathered the men for a brief council. They stood in a circle, breath clouding, as he laid out the situation. We've traveled east for 3 days. The question is, when do we turn north? John spoke first. The blue mist warned us away from the direct northern route, but we don't know how far its warning extended. We could turn north now, or we could continue east another day to be certain. Daniel, one of the younger men, offered his thought. Food supplies are running low. Every day we travel east is a day away from the fishing grounds. James nodded in agreement. My family has perhaps 6 days of food remaining, maybe 7 if we cut portions. Similar reports came from others. The situation was not dire yet, but it was approaching concern. Peter made his decision. We turn north today. We've given the mist's warning its due respect. Now we need to reach our destination. There was relief in the group. A decision, even if uncertain, was better than continued doubt. They adjusted their course, sledges turning to face north. The ridgeline they had been following continued east, but they left it now, descending back onto the flatter tundra. The change in direction brought immediate differences. The wind, which had been a cross breeze on the ridge, now hit them directly from ahead. It was stronger, colder, more challenging. But the ground was smoother. Sledges moved more easily. Dogs pulled with less strain. The trade-off was worth it. They made better distance that day than any day since leaving the southern route. By evening, spirits were cautiously higher. Perhaps the blue mist's danger had been avoided. Perhaps the fishing grounds were closer than feared. That night, Peter allowed himself a moment of hope. They were moving in the right direction again. The weather had held. No one was seriously injured. These were small victories, but in the tundra, small victories were everything. Helen fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's travel. Anna sat beside her, mending a tear in one of their fur blankets by the light of the oil lamp. You made the right decision, she said quietly to Peter. We'll know in a few days, he replied. If we reach the fishing ground safely, then yes. If not... He didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. Outside, the tundra stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere ahead, perhaps 3 or 4 days distant, lay the frozen lakes that had sustained their people for generations. They just needed to reach them. The 5th day of travel began with an unexpected sight. As dawn broke, revealing the landscape in shades of gray and white, someone spotted movement on the horizon ahead. Caribou, a child's voice called out. Everyone stopped, looking where the boy pointed. Sure enough, a small herd of caribou was moving across the tundra, perhaps a mile distant. Maybe 20 animals, their antlers visible against the pale sky. This was significant. Caribou meant several things. Fresh meat if they could make a successful hunt. But more importantly, it meant they were approaching territory where game still traveled. The fishing grounds were in such territory.
Peter made a quick decision. James, Daniel, take 2 others. Try for a hunt. We'll make camp here and wait. The 4 men grabbed their weapons, simple spears and a bow with a few precious arrows, and set off at a careful jog. Hunting caribou on the tundra required patience and skill. The animals could see for miles across the flat expanse. You had to approach from downwind, use every slight depression for cover, wait for the right moment. The rest of the group made camp, though it was still morning. If the hunt was successful, they would need to process the meat, a task that took time, and fresh meat would replenish their depleted stores significantly. Helen watched the hunters disappear into the white landscape. She had seen hunts before, understood their importance. Will they succeed? She asked her mother. Perhaps. Caribou are clever animals, but James is a good hunter. We will hope. The wait stretched long. Morning turned to midday. The sun made its brief appearance, then began its descent. Still no sign of the hunting party. Some families used the time to make repairs. Sledge runners were checked and reinforced. Harnesses were mended. Clothing was examined for wear. Anna and several other women took inventory of food stores, pooling information to understand their collective situation. The numbers were concerning, but not desperate. If the hunt failed, they had perhaps 4 days of food at current rations. If they reduced portions, maybe 6. But reducing portions meant less energy. Less energy meant slower travel. It was a calculation with no easy answer. Late afternoon brought the hunters back.
They were visible from a long distance, 4 figures moving across the snow, and they were dragging something. As they approached, it became clear they had succeeded. Not a full-grown caribou, but a young one, perhaps 200 pounds. It was enough. The camp erupted in quiet celebration. Children smiled. Adults nodded approval. This was a gift from the tundra, accepted with gratitude. The work of processing the animal began immediately. The men who had not hunted now took over, using sharp knives to butcher the caribou efficiently. Nothing would be wasted. Meat was divided fairly among families. Organs were saved for immediate eating, rich in nutrients. The hide would be cleaned and used. Bones would be cracked for marrow. That night's meal was the best they had eaten in days. Fresh liver, cooked quickly over the fire. Strips of meat roasted until the outside charred. The smell alone was nourishing. Helen ate her portions slowly, savoring each bite. She had learned not to waste food, to appreciate every meal. "This will help us reach the fishing grounds," Anna explained to her daughter. "Fresh meat gives us strength." Peter sat with the other men, discussing the hunt. James described how they had crawled for nearly an hour through snow, getting close enough for a bow shot. Daniel had made the shot, a clean hit that brought the animal down quickly. "The herd moved north," James reported. "Same direction we're headed. That's a good sign." John agreed. "Caribou know the land. If they're moving north, they're moving toward grazing areas. Where there's grazing, there's open water in warmer months. Where there's water, there are fish beneath the ice." This reasoning gave everyone confidence. They were on the right path. The 6th day brought them into territory that began to look more familiar. Not that anyone had been here specifically, but the landscape had features they recognized from the approaches to other fishing grounds. Slight variations in elevation, ice formations that suggested water beneath. Peter studied these signs carefully. They were close, perhaps 1 more day, maybe 2. But the temperature was dropping again. Each night seemed colder than the last. The deep cold of true winter was settling in. Once it arrived fully, travel would become even more difficult. "We need to reach the ground soon," John observed, "before the deep cold makes camp setup impossible." Peter knew this. Everything was a race against time and cold and diminishing supplies. That night, as they made camp, something unexpected happened. Helen, who had been energetic all day, suddenly seemed tired beyond normal exhaustion. She sat down by the fire and did not want to move. Anna noticed immediately. She touched her daughter's forehead. Warm, not burning, but warmer than it should be. "Helen, how do you feel?" she asked gently. "Tired, mother, and cold, very cold." Anna's concern deepened. Feeling cold despite sitting near the fire was not a good sign.
She helped Helen into their tent, wrapped her in extra furs, gave her hot tea. Peter watched with worry. Illness in the tundra could escalate quickly. The cold prevented proper rest and recovery.
Bodies already stressed by travel had little reserve to fight sickness. That night, Anna stayed awake, monitoring Helen's condition. The girl's temperature fluctuated. She shivered despite the furs, then seemed to burn with internal heat. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. Peter sat beside them, feeling helpless. There was no medicine here, no healer. They had only warmth, rest, and hope. By morning, Helen seemed slightly better. Her fever had broken during the night, but she was weak, too weak to walk. This presented a new challenge. They needed to keep moving, but Helen needed rest. The solution was to make space for her on the sledge, though it meant redistributing weight and making the dogs work harder. Anna climbed onto the sledge with Helen, holding her daughter close, providing warmth with her own body. Other families offered to take some of their load, lightening the burden. They traveled slowly that day. Peter was torn between the need to reach the fishing grounds and the need to let Helen rest, but stopping was not an option. They had to keep moving. Helen drifted in and out of sleep as the sledge moved. When she was awake, she seemed confused, not quite herself. Anna whispered to her constantly, soothing words, familiar stories, anything to keep the child anchored. Other families watched with sympathy and concern. Any child could be next. Illness respected no one in the cold. By evening, when they made camp, Helen's condition had not improved significantly. She could sit up, could sip hot broth, but remained weak. Anna's face showed the strain of worry. Margaret, Thomas's wife, came to visit. She had experience with childhood illnesses, having raised 3 sons. Keep her warm and hydrated, she advised. The body will fight if given what it needs. And talk to her. Keep her mind engaged. Don't let her drift too far into sleep. Anna nodded, grateful for the guidance. That night became a vigil. Anna did not sleep. She kept Helen close, monitored her breathing, adjusted furs, offered sips of tea. Peter stayed awake as well, tending the lamp, keeping the tent as warm as possible. Toward morning, something shifted. Helen's breathing became more regular. The flush in her cheeks faded to a more normal color. When she opened her eyes, they were clearer, more focused. "Mother?" she whispered. "I'm here, sweet one. Are we at the fishing grounds yet?" Anna's eyes filled with relief. Not yet, but soon. Very soon. And they were. The 7th day of travel brought them to a sight that lifted every heart. A line of cairns on the horizon, markers left by previous travelers, signs that they were entering the fishing grounds territory. Peter felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying begin to ease. They had made it.
Despite the detour, despite the challenges, despite Helen's illness, they had reached their destination. The group increased their pace, energy renewed by proximity to their goal. Even the dogs seemed to sense it, pulling with fresh strength. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of the first lake. It stretched before them, a vast expanse of frozen water covered in snow, perfect for ice fishing. Other groups had already arrived, their camps scattered along the lake shore. Smoke rose from multiple fires. The sight of other people after days of isolation was enormously comforting. Peter led his group to an unclaimed section of shore and called for camp to be made. But this camp would be different. This was not a temporary overnight stop. This would be their home for the next 3 months. Tents were set up with extra care. Positions were chosen to maximize shelter from prevailing winds. Sledges were unloaded completely for the first time since leaving the southern settlements. Helen, still weak but recovering, sat wrapped in furs and watched the activity. Her illness had frightened her, had shown her how fragile survival could be. But she had recovered. The tundra had tested her, and she had endured. That night, for the first time in a week, the group gathered around a large fire without worry. They had food from the caribou hunt. They had shelter. They had reached safety. Peter stood and spoke to the assembled families. "We have completed a difficult journey. The blue mist changed our path, but we adapted. We helped each other, and we arrived safely, all of us." He paused, looking around the circle of weathered faces. "Tomorrow we begin fishing. We will fill our stores for winter. We will rest and recover our strength. And in the spring, we will make the return journey home." There was satisfaction in the group. They had done what needed to be done. John, the eldest, added his own words. "I have made this journey many times. Each time is different. Each time teaches something new. This year, the blue mist taught us flexibility. It taught us to trust our instincts and respect the land's warnings. These are good lessons." The fire burned bright as families talked quietly among themselves. Tomorrow would bring work, the hard labor of cutting holes through thick ice,
setting fishing lines, checking them daily. But tonight was for rest and relief. Anna sat with Helen, both wrapped in the same large fur. The girl was eating a small portion of fish stew, slowly rebuilding her strength. I was scared, Helen admitted quietly. I know, Anna replied. I was scared too. But fear is natural. What matters is that you kept breathing, kept fighting, and your body healed. Helen thought about this. Will I get sick again? Perhaps. The cold is hard on everyone. But now you know you can recover. That knowledge makes you stronger. The night deepened. One by one, families retired to their tents. But there was less urgency tonight, less anxiety.
They were no longer traveling. They had arrived. Peter lay beside Anna and Helen, listening to his daughter's steady breathing. The crisis had passed. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter. Months of fishing and cold, but also community and relative stability. He thought about the blue mist. Perhaps a storm they had missed by taking the eastern route. Perhaps something else entirely. It didn't matter. They had listened to the warning. They had adapted, and they had survived. Outside, the tundra stretched vast and cold under a sky full of stars. The frozen lake lay silent, holding secrets beneath its thick ice. Secrets that would be revealed in the morning when fishing began. But for now, there was sleep. Deep, restful sleep. The kind that came only when immediate danger had passed and relative safety had been achieved. The blue mist was far behind them now, returned to wherever such mysteries resided when not needed. The peasants slept in their new camp, dreams filled with fish and food and the promise of surviving another winter. And when morning came, pale and cold but familiar, they rose to face it together, a community shaped by hardship, strengthened by cooperation, enduring through patience and respect for the land that both threatened and sustained them. This was survival in the tundra, not dramatic or heroic, but steady and determined. One day following another, one challenge met and the next approaching, all of it accepted as the price of living in this harsh and beautiful place. The journey from the blue mist to the fishing grounds was complete. Life would continue here through the dark winter months. And when spring came, when the ice began to crack and the sun returned for longer hours, they would pack their sledges again and make the journey home. But that was months away. For now, there was work to do. Fish to catch, children to feed, winter to survive. The same tasks their ancestors had performed, the same challenges met with the same quiet determination. And somewhere, perhaps, the blue mist would appear again for other travelers, offering its silent warning, changing paths, saving lives in ways that would never be fully known. But such mysteries were part of the tundra. You accepted them along with the cold, the danger, the beauty. You respected what you could not understand and adapted to what you could not change. This was wisdom, and it carried the peasants through another season, another year, another generation. The fishing grounds welcomed them. The ice held firm. The work continued. Life endured. If you found peace in this story of quiet survival and ancient wisdom, please consider subscribing to this channel for more tales that help you relax and drift into restful contemplation. Thank you for traveling with us across the frozen tundra. Sleep well, and may your journey be gentle.